First I used a table saw to cut some 1/4-inch MDF to size. Once the pieces were cut, I put them on a base also made from MDF. The walls were placed diagonally on the base to make the most use of space and also for some visual interest. They were glued in place using Titebond wood glue. Of course, the wood was a mistake as it turns out, because it was exactly where the stairs would be going. Here the basswood panel above the doorway is measured for a trim. And then it was cut on the mini table saw. This is a great tool for smaller cuts, which would be too dangerous on my full-size saw. Next, the 1/2-inch molding was cut with a handy little miter saw. The arc was measured for the top molding of the doorway panel with a compass. This part of the molding was made from a piece of 1/8-inch 1/4 round styrene rod and glued with some thick cyanacrylate and some catalyst. The rest of the molding was cut from 1/8-inch 1/4 round basswood rod cut at 45-degree angles. After this setup, the panel was painted with gray craft acrylics. I use mostly craft acrylics for priming structures and terrain. The walls were given a fairly sloppy coat of golden, extra heavy acrylic gel matte to both hide some seams and give a look of weathered plaster on the walls. Once the mat dried, the whole thing was painted with gray Ceramcoat brand acrylic paint. It was the best, because it was cheap and was what I had. These pieces of trim were cut to be doorway moldings. Of course, the smaller clamps only fit on one side, so I had to get out the overkill size clamps for the longer section. Now it was time to get out the liquid latex, and of course the bottle I had looked like it either froze at some point or just dried out from old age. I like to use the sponge because they have a good random pattern instead of the manufactured synthetic sponges. Next comes some fun with the Lazy Man's airbrush, which is an airbrush and compressor combo that is perfect for these types of projects. It charges by USB and lasts for about an hour of continuous use. This is definitely my vote for Hobby Tool of the Year, because I always find excuses not to use my airbrushes on projects just because I don't feel like setting up the compressor and the hose, etc., etc. But now I use the airbrush all the time. The compressor works with any dual-stage hobby airbrush too. It's not married to the one that comes with it. Here's where I tried to remove some of the thinner latex, and it mostly just stuck to the walls and gave a real craptacular effect. But that's when I went back to put the thickened latex mixed with the thinned up type. And bingo, I guess, you know? When I did the next step here, I thought I screwed the pooch completely, and the yellow was just overpowering and a terrible choice. But I guess that's why you gotta trust the process and keep it moving. The next step was good in theory, and I've had good luck with it before, but I don't know if it was too cold in my shop or if the PVA glue had gone funky or what. But the effect I was going for never really happened. As far as the molding went, it never really crackled in the way I wanted. Some of the glue came off in big patches. Now it was time to deal with the yellow, and once I started taking the paint off in some spots, it started looking pretty good. Some strategic sponging of the dark green color gave it the look I was going for anyway. A lot of the effect of the dingy abandoned look is achieved through washes of various colors, alternating light to dark and anywhere in between. The color I started with is just a blend of black acrylic paint with Mod Podge thinned with water. As long as it's not too uniform in application or color, it usually works. Here, a lighter shade of the yellow was used mixed with tan paint and water. I had some of the Vallejo pigments that had been sent to me, so I gave them a try. And they work pretty well, both dry and put over a wash. They add to the overall dingy and grungy kind of look. Now a thicker wash was spattered on the walls with a stencil brush, starting from dark to light. Another sponge was needed to keep this effect looking organic and not fake and crappy. This step really added to the overall grime and dirty feel on the walls. Here's another tool I never knew I needed until I got it. The Fisker's rotary sheet cutter is great for cutting strips of almost any thin sheet material, like paper, cardboard, chipboard, and even some sheet styrene, up to 0.06 inches. I used it here to cut cardboard Captain Crunch boxes into 1-inch squares to use as flooring tiles. They were so excited, they started without me. Hey guys, I'll see you over there. I squeezed some Titebond wood glue down on the base of the project and spread it out into a thin layer. And then stuck the tiles down in rows. tearing some at uneven angles to look like broken and damaged pieces. The tiles were then sealed with a 50-50 mix of Mod Podge and black paint as a sealer and primer. The color of the tiles ended up being gray, because before I even really thought about it, I had already painted it on and started weathering it. Vallejo Environmental Wash Slimy Green was used for a little bit of color variation to the floor and emphasized the seams between the tiles and the wall too. The Vallejo Dark Earth and Sepia, as well as tans, yellows, and greens, were used on pretty much all of the surfaces. After the washes were dry, I dry brushed all of the raised surfaces with various shades of tan and white, going lighter and lighter as time went on. I built a little set of stairs when I thought you weren't paying attention. And then I covered the tops of them with cutouts from index cards glued with more wood glue. Stringers were cut from tongue depressors and coffee stirrers. These were all glued with extra thick Titebond, which bonds quicker and sets up stronger than the regular kind. The larger cage side of the stairs was built from thin plywood. The stairs were painted with a dark roast coffee color Ceramcoat craft acrylic paint. The bottom railing of the cage on the stairs were made from some pieces of styrene angle extrusion. These were glued to quarter-inch square styrene rods cut to 45-degree angles and bonded with PVC cement. I preferred the PVC cement for thicker styrene because it seems to make a stronger bond on these joints. Thanks to the Platypus Scotsman for that little tip. I saw him using it on one of his builds and I converted. And just all around good diorama builds, check out his channel, the Platypus Scotsman. I gave the frame of the cage a quick coat of brown from Vallejo, and then laid out the lines to cut for some granny grading, the framework that's used for needlepoint and cross-stitching, but makes great square or diamond-shaped mesh for miniature windows, doors, and cages, etc. The thing about the grading, though, is it doesn't stick to any solvent-based or cyanacrylate adhesives. I tried. So it's pretty much hot glue or nothing, but hot glue works great as long as you go easy with it. If anyone has a better way to attach it, leave a comment, because I haven't come up with anything yet. The metal frame needed some attachment points where it would be bolted together, so I made these out of sheet styrene and attached them at the corners of the frame. I attached some clamps and doused the styrene with cement and let it set up. The Sand-It sanding block from NWSL came in handy to square up the edges of all the attachment points. With the framework and lower cage area together, I painted it a dark brown. This chain link looking stuff is armature mesh for sculpting, and it comes in a few different sizes, which are good for different scales of chain link. For the framework of the chain link portion of the cage, I used these square acrylic rods I've had for a while. They are actually pretty much crap for this job, and they're brittle, and they don't really react well with the solvent and the adhesives I have. Originally, I tried to just place them around the piece of mesh, but that wasn't working at all. So I put them on a cookie sheet with magnets on the edges to make the corners of the frame square. Now onto the high-tech stuff, and the wire tie electric box. The end of a medium-sized cable tie is the right size and shape to become a light switch in this scale. So after cutting off the rest of the tie, I sanded the surface of it square. Then a hole was drilled to accept a styrene rod for the conduit. Steel and aluminum paints were used to make the box and conduit look like metal. A piece of square styrene sheet was cut with a plate, and some T-angled styrene rod also had two pieces cut off of the end to form the switches of the box. Once the frame of the cage was dry, I started to paint different values of brown and orangey rust-colored paints. It was just a mishmash of colors, making sure not to be too uniform in the coverage of any one color. Even after using the cookie sheet and magnets, the acrylic rod just didn't want to stay together. So I placed the wire mesh on what was already together and use cyanacrylate to attach each little point of the metal where it would touch the acrylic. After one side of the frame was secure, I ground down the excess dried glue from it so the remaining pieces of acrylic could be glued on this side of the mesh. On this side, I used flexible cyanacrylate so the acrylic rods wouldn't just pop off the mesh, and it seemed to work pretty well. And here are some more places for bolts to go on the structure. I also placed some quarter-round pieces of styrene on the corner plates for added detail. Vallejo Muddy Brown was also used as a rust color in splotchy patches, and also for some muddy brown. The heads of pushpins make realistic bolt heads in this scale, so I snipped a bunch of them with the side cutters. Next, the Dremel was used with a tiny drill bit to make holes in the corner plates for the pins to fit into. And I tried to put them in the hole with tweezers. And I tried again. Then I tried again, because I figured it would be a different result. And then I tried some folded up masking tape on the end, which worked perfect. The finished cage was attached to the stairs also with the flexible cyanacrylate. This is so much easier to work with than the regular kind of glue. Now that the cage was in place, I started to use AK Interactive crusted rust deposits in dark, medium, and light tones. This is a mix of powdered grout and burnt umber paint with some PVA and water mixed in it. I also put some railroad ballast into it to give it a bit of a base layer for the plaster and other debris to be pressed into. After that, I spread some more water, PVA, and brown paint mixture on the ballast. Plaster of Paris was mixed with some Golden brand thin burnt umber acrylic paint into a runny soup consistency, poured into some shallow plastic plates so it would be a thin, easy to break layer. After it hardened, I broke it into pieces that were then mixed with more paint and some watery PVA and used as more rubble. Now some Sculpt-A-Mold paper mache was mixed up to the consistency of cookie dough and also had some brown paint added into it. This mixture was spread along the base of the walls and stairs, and then had some more smaller broken pieces of plaster pressed into it. The final details were the pipes and beams and other metal bits. There are metal drinking straws and sunglass frames, VCR parts, and different gauge wire in there too. These were all glued onto the base with some E6000 contact cement. I'd like to thank you all for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you got something out of it today, please hit the like button and subscribe.